discovery of the remains of SUZANNE Morphew, the Salida mom who went missing on Mother's Day of 2020. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation announced it had discovered her remains near the town of Moffett.
That's about 2 hours southwest of Colorado Springs and not far from Sand Dunes National Park in Saguache County. KRDO News Channel 13's Annabelle Childers is live in Moffett at the area. Locals believe that discovery happened. Annabelle?
We are right off Highway 17 in Moffett, surrounded by bits and pieces of caution tape, and you can see 2 pieces right there tied to these plants. Now, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation will not confirm that this is exactly.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear, and the thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Hey guys, welcome to another live stream. What you're seeing on screen right now is footage recorded in the past couple of hours by a local, and I really wish I could play you the narration that he provides, because it's really top notch. But you kind of get a really good idea of what is going on through this footage. And you're going to see he's going to turn to the side in a moment. You can see he's standing on his vehicle, looking over to the one side. You really get a better idea of exactly what we're talking about in this footage. He actually says there's a dwelling on the far end. So although it says dead end road, there is a dwelling there. Let's just pause it over there, go back slightly. And the other thing that I think is really useful with his footage that is recorded is, did you know that there's that tree right over there? And there's the, I think he said it's a trailer, but it's gutted, that there's no one living there and nothing kind of going on there. But I must say, my impression just from what I'd seen in the media, from the news reports, was that it was just a featureless field. It's actually not completely featureless. There is that one big tree in the middle of this sort of desolate area. And I must say, I personally thought, surely you would leave some sort of marker, because surely at some point you want to make sure you want to, in a way, maintain the anonymity, the invisibleness of your handiwork. And if you can't actually remember where it is, well, that's not really going to work out for you. And so, sure enough, there is a tree there. You may remember in the Laurie Vallow case, JJ was buried right next to a big tree, one of the biggest trees on the property, beside that pond. And so there is some kind of indication for the killer to remember, the general area. The other thing that I think is interesting with this is, if the killer arrived here and didn't want to be seen, if he'd parked his vehicle somewhere over here, and you're going to see from other footage that there are houses in the distance, but if you're looking from a distance, you would basically assume that the vehicle that's parked here is part of this setup, if you weren't really paying attention. The same also applies in terms of the highway. If you parked your vehicle here and then went all the way back there, I don't know for a fact what happened, but I'm just saying you could have plausible deniability in parking your vehicle next to this sort of area, right? So from this perspective, you can see that there's a house over there, and then they're far away sort of shacks and dwellings over there. But this house would potentially have some kind of line of sight this way. And so if you parked your vehicle, let's go back slightly. If you parked your vehicle in front of that, I don't know if you would necessarily notice it, right? So yeah, you can actually see the shadow of him standing on his vehicle, and you get a sense, just going back slightly, the grave from the vehicle is sort of just over there. We're going to be looking at the soil, the type of soil, in a few moments. By the way, it's good to see Jean Karras. Jean lives in Boulder. I actually met Jean, so it's good to have you in chat. That looks like the moon is up. I think this was shot quite early in the morning. So if you are driving, right, if you are going to the area and you don't know where this is, well, you would look out for a biggish tree on the right-hand side. If you're traveling south, on the right-hand side of the highway, kind of in the middle of nowhere, that would be your marker, I guess, in your mind if you're trying to give someone directions. So at this point, I don't know if you saw that, he's jumped off the truck and now he's going to move from the road to the gravesite. There's the first piece of crime scene tape. And you can see there are actually two spots. There's this spot over here. There's this spot over here. And then there's that spot just beyond it, where it looks like a lot of the bush has been pulled out. So there's that spot as well. And you can see there are a lot of tire tracks from that bobcat that was looking for something in this area. Now, I don't know if you can see from this footage, but the soil actually looks kind of damp. Some people have been sort of making a bit of fun of me that I was saying that this is a swamp. I'm just saying that this is not, that this is really flat land. And so when it rains, it can actually, because it's so flat, you could probably have puddles of water for periods of time leading to kind of muddy or moist soil. The question then is how muddy and how moist, and could that lead to some kind of situation where you would take that dirt with you into your vehicle, perhaps take it in terms of evidence trail, and then also how easy is it to excavate in the soil? And that's what I've tried to answer in terms of this analysis. So let me ask you guys, just looking at that soil, does that look like it's very hard? Does it look like almost like typical desert soil, like really hard baked? It's like this hard crust to get through. Does it look like that? So, okay, so we've just missed that. Let's just go back again. So have a look at when he pans the camera, look how far this is from the road. The road is really just there. I would really have loved to have showed you his vehicle to give you a sense of a vehicle parked there, but for reasons of privacy, I haven't done that. But the road is actually just over there. Something else that's giving you an idea of the location is this line here, this line of pylons, right? And so this grave is between these pylons and the tree. So now we're going to get a closer look at the soil. Does that look very hard? Does it look very dry? So this is the value of being at the scene. And so, as I say, I wish I could give you a bit more information about all of this. I wish you could hear him speaking. But what he's basically saying is the surface layer of soil is very, very loose, as you can see there. It's about 2 or 3 inches that are very loose, very soft. And then he says you hit a very hard layer. He says below this initial sandy layer is a clay layer. And I'm going to show you a kind of a, what's the word, almost a cut through, a vertical version through the soil where you get a sense of this clay layer. And he said that layer is actually very tough and hard to get through. And then it's about, I can't remember what he said, is it 2 or 3 feet thick? And then below that clay layer is another sand layer, and then there's the water table. So so that's kind of the situation. So one reason possibly why it's a shallow grave, no matter who committed this crime, is because below those 2 or 3 inches of soft soil is very hard clay. So I don't know if you can see that he's struggling to get any deeper than that first level. Now, the other thing that's important with the dirt that you're seeing there is the question, are we going to find any dirt like that in the suspect's clothing, shoes, vehicle, anything like that? And so in terms of this investigation, let's just see if I can quickly bring it up. And funnily enough, these are actually defense exhibits. This is a photo of the inside of Barry's vehicle. You can see it's very dirty. Look at the pieces of dirt over there. Look at that as well. I don't know, as far as I'm concerned, at face value, this dirt looks kind of an orange color, whereas the dirt that we've just seen there is kind of a gray. I think you'll agree. And of course, this dirt could be the dirt that when he goes home, you know, picks up that dirt, which I must say is also kind of a gray color because I've also driven that road. But they would want to analyze the dirt here, right? Just a couple, we'll just go through a couple more of these images. Again, this is the inside of the vehicle. And one more. I think it's this one. So you'd want to look at the dirt, for example, over there and on the tires and, you know, have a look at that. But there's also a much simpler way is you could look at the locations that his vehicle visited. And it turns out that, so this is actually, as far as I remember, a defense exhibit. And we've just heard Barry's lawyers saying that he never went south or something like that. And so let's have a look at the locations from the defense exhibit. We've got Arcadia, Buena Vista, Denver, Colorado Springs, Telluride. Oh, what have we got here? Creestone. And Creestone is south of the Morphew residence, and it's almost in the same line as Moffett. Let's have a quick look at that on a map. So the distance from Creestone to Moffett is less than 4 miles. It's about 3.5 miles, 15 minutes drive. I also don't know whether if you went to Moffett, whether it would register because it's a tiny town of 100 people or so. Creestone's obviously bigger. And so, well, anyway, yeah, you've got confirmation that his vehicle did go south and it did go very close to this area. The other thing that it's giving you confirmation of is, at least in terms of Barry Morphew, he's someone that had some familiarity with this area based on this based on this location data. The thing that is curiously missing from this location data is it doesn't provide a date. It provides you with everything else: name, city, longitude, everything except the date. And that's what you would want to know. When was he in Creastone? Right? What is the date of this location data? But the bottom line is quite interesting. We've actually got confirmation via the defense information of that Barry had been to Creastone, and we're going to return to this idea of, wow, he would never have gone south. He's never been south. We'll return to that idea. Okay, so let's get back to this footage. So what's quite useful with this photo is you can see from the road just how close this site is to the road. And obviously from this perspective, it looks like there's literally nothing there. It just looks like bush. And so why would anyone go there, and how would anyone stumble across anything in all of this nothingness, right? It's actually quite incredible. I think another question that arises is, when last was that trailer that's parked by the tree, when last was that occupied? So as you can see, it's a very small town, very few people there. In this image, it's easy to miss that tree. Unfortunately, this vehicle is blocking that tree out. There's the excavator over there. But what I'm trying to get at is, if you were trying to figure out, just from observing the media narrative, if you were trying to figure out where is this, you would, I mean, the easy way to say it is, well, there's a tree in the middle of nowhere, 1.5 miles south of Moffat, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to find it, even if you knew that you were looking for something. And if you, let's just go back slightly. If you look over here, that tree and the excavator are almost in the same line. Do you guys see that? The tree is obscured by this vehicle, but the tree is almost in the same line as the grave. And so that gives you another view from the road, not only of the tree, but there's also a line of these power lines. And so the murderer was probably thinking, I want to remember this in terms of a grid pattern. So people who don't know what I'm doing are just going to see nothingness and will never assume anything. But I'm going to choose my spot based on the road going that way and the power lines going that way, and that will mean I know where it is. And yeah, so the point that I was trying to make earlier is, it was really hard to believe you'd bury someone somewhere and then not be able to find those remains yourself. And so here's kind of confirmation with this tree that there is a kind of a marker there. I suppose you could use your phone as well to locate it. There's another view also taken by this person who sent me the information of this trailer. I don't know if you guys can see, it's abandoned. It doesn't look, it would be interesting if you could go inside there, but I mean, the door's open. I don't know whether it's still functional, but he told me that it's a gutted, abandoned trailer. So I think you guys have seen this footage, but here again, you see just how close this is to the road. And so one does wonder, when did this disposal take place? It's hard to imagine it took place in the daytime, that you would just go out there in the day. I think at night, if you chose your timing quite well, like, 2 a.m., 4 a.m., something like that, you could imagine that there would be no one on the road. And I can tell you, I drove from the Great Sand Dunes to Boulder. I left the Great Sand Dunes at dusk, and there were long periods when I was driving the route that Barry, and so it includes this road as well. There were long periods when I was driving that route. It starts off being the I-17, where there was literally absolutely nobody on the road. I was the only vehicle on the road, and even coming very close to Boulder and Denver, I'm talking about still 15, 20 miles out, but this is now very close to, midnight, 10 o'clock at night, whatever. Very, very few vehicles on the road. So that would be nighttime, would be under the cover of darkness. I don't know if anyone would see you, so that does seem to be a strategy that would or could work. So there you get a sense again of these pylons that are actually passing very close to this site. These pylons also passing really close to it. This is the view towards Moffett, and as you can see, there's one homestead that's the closest sort of what appears to be human habitation. That's the closest to this site, but it's not very prominent. So if you were fairly low down, hunched over digging, I'm not sure if anyone would see you, especially at night. So one thing he did point out is he said you can't really see it in this footage, but this road does go to a house somewhere at the end here. And so presumably, and it's a dead end road. So presumably there's sort of one, in terms of the traffic going up and down this road, there's basically one, I won't say one vehicle because it might be a couple of laborers, but very minimal vehicle traffic going this way. And the fact that there's a dead end means, it's not a through road. So you wouldn't have a lot of people coming this way and stopping for any reason. I can't help thinking that it is still, even though this is ostensibly a good site, I can't help thinking just the fact that someone might come and live here, someone might retrieve their trailer and someone else could come and stay here. It's actually very close to this gravesite, just across the way from there. But I think that then raises if you think about it, doesn't that raise the possibility that you start thinking, well, did the guy in the trailer commit this crime? If you remember what Barry Morphew said in his original statement, which he released on Facebook, he was basically suggesting that she was abducted, right? And so by burying her fairly close to a trailer like this, aren't you suggesting that someone from this area may have abducted Suzanne? So this isn't really the reason why I kind of wanted to deal with this kind of particular issue. I actually want to deal with something else and then leave it to you guys to decide, what do you think is the number one clue, the most important clue thus far that we've all missed? What do you think it is? So I'm not going to be very obvious about it, although I'm not sure if it's going to be easy to present it to you, but we'll see. Over here, you can see there's actually a road going along the fence line. So there is a kind of an access here. Theoretically, whoever killed Suzanne could also have driven off the dirt road into this area, and you can see it's quite depressed. It's quite sort of low. If you drove your vehicle here, I'm not sure if your vehicle would be easily visible, especially at night, even from folks looking from that perspective. Can you see this is the road is higher up than this level, and that level over there is really low. And these bushes are not as tall as a person, but there'd be very little sticking out. There'd be maybe your head and shoulders, but not much besides that. If you actually bent over digging, you'd basically be invisible. So can you see there are cars moving down there, right? Can you see over there? That's how close this is to. And then I guess this would be private property. So what's really useful with this footage is it gives you a sense of perspective of this area. And so there's actually made I'm not quite sure what you call it, a ping site, but there you've got it on his phone. There you have, I think that's the I-17, that's the county road, and then that's the location. I just want to say thanks very much for going to all this trouble to get that. And now we're going to move on to the number one clue we all missed. What do you guys think it is? Like, we are here to talk about something that we should have seen early on but missed. What do you think that puzzle piece is that we all missed? Any thoughts about that? I'll give you guys a clue. It's something that nobody really thought of, and it was mentioned very flippantly, very sort of by the way, and I actually didn't quite register when they said it. I thought they were talking about something else, and it turns out to be very important to this investigation. Thanks a lot, Zircon. Okay, so let's continue. So I think I'm going to be explicit about it. I'm not going to be cryptic. I'm going to be explicit about the number one clue we all missed, and this is a kind of a clue to that. This is a picture of Suzanne Morphew in hospital. You can see there's this bag behind her, right? What do you think I'm driving at? The answer's in the next image. Fadika says the clothing she was wearing. By the way, thanks a lot for your super chat earlier. There you go. There's the answer. Well done. That's the answer. Now, I've got to tell you that I was going to do a quick video, and I ended up searching over an hour, maybe 2 hours, and I searched everywhere. I started off just Googling images, couldn't find it that way. And it's not just a Google for 5 minutes. It's Googling cancer port, Googling hospital, Googling cancer, Googling, Suzanne Morphew cancer treatment, whatever, Suzanne Morphew photos. And I wasn't able to find it. And then I went through my own archives, which are really extensive. And eventually I found this image. It's this one. right? And that is where it was located. That cancer port was located over there. And I kind of first thought I'm just going to do a quick little video dealing with the cancer port aspect. I've got to say, when the reporter mentioned it, she spoke so quickly and sort of flippantly that I understood that she'd said something like cancer report. I thought some of her medical information, perhaps dental records, obviously that's pretty unlikely, but perhaps some of her dental records would be in this cancer report. That's how I understood it. And then I realized, no, it's actually cancer port, to some extent, thanks to some of your comments. And, what does that tell us? The fact that it wasn't just dental, what do you call it? It wasn't just, dental records and teeth that revealed these remains belonging to Suzanne Morphew, but also the cancer port. And I don't know, to me, the what that suggests is that without the one, in other words, without the cancer port, would there really be enough information to absolutely confirm these remains as Suzanne Morphew, right? And I find that a little bit troubling, because I think if the dental records, if the dental aspect was sufficient, then you wouldn't even need the cancer port. On the other hand, I suppose you could say, if the human remains are so deteriorated, if there's so little that is salvaged from that, if there's very few bones and if the bones are scattered, then you're going to want every little piece of evidence that you can get. And so it turns out to be dental records and this cancer port. And I can't help thinking there's this interesting analogy in a way between Suzanne had a spy pen, which obviously looks like a pen, looks a bit more like a ballpoint pen. And then there's but it's kind of like this kind of object. And then there is the plastic of also something that looks like a pen of I'm trying to think, what do you call it? The tranquilizer dart cap, right? So you have something that belongs to Suzanne that is pen-shaped, and then there's something that belongs to Barry, one would imagine, that's also this shape, and they're sort of analogous to one another, right? And so, and that now you end up having something that is apparently plastic that possibly gives away Suzanne's identity, despite all of these efforts to hide it. And again, one thing that I couldn't help thinking is, why is it so hard to find these images, right? In the end, I think I found it on one of my own videos, and then I took a screen grab of one of my videos. But I kind of thought, why is it that when I do a Google image search for hours, this is the one image that I can't find? Well, maybe it's been intentionally withheld, right? You would think that the cancer story is part of Suzanne's, who she is, who she was. And so why is it so hard finding these images? The other thing that I just can't remember is where these images come from. I don't remember. I can't remember whether her sister may have shared it with the media at some point. Anyone remember where you first saw these images? Yeah, by the way, just while we're on this topic, we are not here to judge and convict anybody. We're just following the evidence here. I'm sure you're aware that defamation and making statements, public statements, if you can't prove them, then you could be the subject of a lawsuit. Right now, Barry Morphew is suing a whole bunch of people. It's like a long list of people. he's suing them for $15 million. So if you can't prove your case, if you're going to make an unambiguous statement, then you're going to have to prove it, or you might have to pay up. So please don't do that on my channel. Please don't get me into trouble. What we're trying to do is simply interrogate the evidence and see where it points, what it points to, what it doesn't point to, and just take it from that perspective. Run the World says, I've never seen that image. It's like I say, very hard image to get hold of, even when you're looking for it. Silent Murmur says, I had no idea people had mechanical implants for chemo injections. So we're going to look into that now. That is basically what's going on. You have a little thing that allows for, how can I put it? It allows for regular injections. I'm a little bit embarrassed to admit this, but in my past, I was a guinea pig for a couple of medical trials. I was a poor student, and I did medical trials in South Africa, in London. One time it was a SmithKline Beecham clinic. One time it was in Ireland, Belfast. But I've done quite a few medical trials, and what they invariably do is they insert a cannula into your vein. What that allows is they don't have to every time puncture your vein. Instead, they can just insert the needle into this device and then feed it. One of the things you've got to do is keep it clean and flush it out every now and then so that it doesn't kind of block up. So oh, is that an image from my Twitter? That's really interesting. That's really interesting. Thanks a lot for that. That does actually make sense. And so this is kind of the setup, right? It won't necessarily be identical to this, but this is kind of what we're talking about. And so I just went online to get a picture from the real world, so it's not a illustration. And so this is the kind of thing. So you would imagine that this sort of thing was found in the dirt, this sort of thing. And so I guess one thing you could do is you could take that thing. I suppose you could test it for DNA. You would imagine that inside it, things could get sort of lodged inside the piping and so on. The other thing is you could perhaps take that device and send it to her doctor and ask, whether it can be traced back to a particular vendor. And I don't know whether you would have one port for this kind of cancer and one for that one, but you could certainly make the case that the doctor saying, yes, this is exactly what Suzanne had. It's not just someone with any condition or whatever it is. So it is pretty incredible that the killer who went to so much trouble to dispose of her body actually didn't destroy or get rid of this piece of evidence. And in the Rex Heuermann case, there's one single hair with DNA on it, and that DNA is a match to the DNA found on the pizza crust. And I think it's possible that one single hair attached to one victim could be the evidence that convicts Rex Heuermann. And the interesting thing then is he's matched to one victim, and then if you can have kind of chain link evidence. If the circumstances of the one victim match the circumstances of the other, then he becomes potentially implicated in all the other crimes, but not necessarily. So in this case, is this going to be the key piece of evidence? what I do think is important here is that even the defense have accepted that these compromised remains are Suzanne Morphew's. And you know what? I think if they hadn't done that, if they'd basically said, no, we don't accept that these are Suzanne Morphew's remains, they could even have taken this issue that there was contamination at the crime scene, that members of the public, that reporters went there, blah, 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 and turned all those people into potential suspects, that maybe a reporter committed this crime and maybe their evidence there means X, Y, Z. But the fact that they brought out a statement as soon as they did saying, okay, we accept this, is fortunate, actually. At least that hurdle has now been overcome. Okay, so I'm going to now deal with a video that I put up some time ago. It's called Suzanne's Cancer Mountain. And I must say, I was pretty disappointed at the time. I can't tell you how often I'll put up a video that I think is the most important analysis of a particular case, and then nobody watches it. Like the video that I think is the critical thing, people just don't watch. Anyway, this is an example, and it's titled Suzanne's Cancer Mountain. It's only got 4,000 views two years ago. Only 4,000 views.
She definitely made implications that she had concerns about her safety, and the condition of their relationship had I think deteriorated quite a bit over the last several years. And my sister and I we were not sisters who frequently talked daily, or even
hello and welcome,
who frequently talked daily.
Okay, so let's have a look at this article. Some days I would be in the chair next to her getting chemo. Suzanne was one of the nicest people I've met. She was always cheerful and had a great attitude about her cancer and life. She loved her daughters more than anything in this world, and they loved her more than anything too. She would never just up and leave them, never. Her daughters, one or both, would always be with her for her treatments. I saw Barry come in once. Now, what's important with this? What's important with this particular little bit of information is how considerate, how empathetic, how loving was Barry to Suzanne, right? He says he loved her. He says he cared about her. And so, yeah, you've got a person who knew Suzanne via the chemo thing, and yeah, you've got a person seeing Barry just so someone who's got no horse in the race. It's someone who was simply in the same situation as Suzanne, and obviously had her own family members taking care of her or not. Thanks a lot, Sarah. And so this was her perception of Barry in terms of Suzanne's chemo. And there's some interesting analogies between Barry Morphew and Suzanne, who was ill, and Chris Watts and Shanann, who was ill, who had problems with her health and the problems with the health of the Watts children. You must bear in mind that chemo is expensive. You must bear in mind that medical treatment can be expensive. And so if you are struggling financially, if you built a big house and just assume that everything's going to be hunky-dory, and now you've got unforeseen medical bills, that might make you kind of resentful. It might make you feel, I don't know, it might make you feel selfish in some ways. that, wow, I didn't really anticipate this. Wow, I've got to deal with this as well, as a kind of a burden, right? And so she says here, I saw Barry come in once. He was not overly friendly and seemed to be uncomfortable there. That is not unusual, as it's often for loved ones to be there. So it's not someone who doesn't like Barry. This person's actually quite sympathetic, saying, it is actually understandable that you'd feel, what's the word? You'd feel a little, not triggered, but the sight of whatever you're seeing, blood and injections and things, might be hard to tolerate, right? Even for someone who is a loving person. But it's interesting, I saw Barry come in just one time, whereas her daughters were always there for her treatments. Okay, so let's go on to over here.
Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. That was the voice of Suzanne's sister Melinda with the Heart of the Rockies radio, I think interviewed by Terence West. And I'll put a link to the full interview in the description. There's actually more to say regarding what she talks about in terms of how close she was to her sister. We'll deal with that in a minute. In this episode, we're going to deal with the scale of the cancer mountain that Suzanne had to kind of scale. We want to look at the scale and scope of the second cancer scare. Now, if the timeline in the article that I'll also put a link to that in the description from Fox 21, if the timeline is accurate, Suzanne actually had cancer during their move from Indiana to Colorado in the fall of 2018. Would you want to move house, move state in the middle of fighting a terminal illness?
So just think about that. Like, Suzanne actually has cancer. She's in the middle of battling cancer. And her husband says, hey, let's move to Colorado. Do you think that's the best thing to be doing? So you've got cancer, and now you do something like, which has got a lot of, it's going to take a lot out of you. You've got to find a new home. You've got to set your family up. You've got to get your daughters into new schools. You've got to move all of your possessions from A to B. And would you want to do that in the middle of having cancer? And I can't help thinking someone who would expect that from you, someone who'd say, let's move to Colorado, and you say, well, actually, I've got cancer at the moment. Can I first beat this? No, let's go now. Someone doing that is a little, isn't that a little self-centered? Shouldn't your priority be keeping your partner alive and getting your partner to a state of being well? And so you can see, or it seems like Barry was used to getting his way, and Suzanne often let him get his way. But once they were in Colorado, then that didn't happen. I think there's also another thing going on here is, wasn't someone thinking, anticipating, expecting that Suzanne may not survive this? That, well, I want my life to continue in Colorado. Well, if you're not going to make it, well, but I need to carry on with my life. It gives you an idea of priorities and that kind of thing. On the other hand, maybe Suzanne said, you know what, let's go. I think I'm going to be okay. Maybe she didn't resist the idea, but we would get the best answers from that from her family. The other thing to consider is, if Suzanne is away from her family, then and bear in mind, when Suzanne disappeared, her family had to come from Indiana, which is quite a few states away. I've been in both states. They've got to come from far away to look for her, and also they don't really know what's happening with her as they would if they were in the same state, right? Very similar situation with Chris Watts.
And not for the first time, for the second time. before we get to today's episode, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do.
So that's quite an interesting point. Could she have wanted to go there for cancer specialists? Well, I don't know if you would move to an area like Maysville or Salida, which is really in the sticks. I mean, it's almost 3 hours drive to Denver, like a major center in Colorado. It's almost so, you know, if the idea was that you moving there to be closer to doctors. Well, I don't think that's the answer. I don't think that. I think if you move to a home close to Denver or something like that, then that would be a reasonable assumption.
Linda, talking about the marriage deteriorating. I must say, when I first heard this, I didn't really think too much of it. I mean, you could almost say, obviously, in retrospect, the marriage was deteriorating given the end result. But one's got to be careful being cynical and not paying attention to what family members said, because at the end of that part of the conversation, she talks about receiving.
Have you ever noticed in this particular image, you can see mountain bikes in the background? And so what's quite strange is Barry's not really dressed for mountain biking. I'm not really sure where this is, but I'd be interested to know whether this location is where Suzanne would normally drive to and then mountain bike from there. Do you remember what that young kid said? That Suzanne didn't normally mountain bike from their home, but drove somewhere. I wonder whether this spot is that spot. Just curious.
A kind of quite a emotional text from Suzanne on Friday night, I believe, which was just before she disappeared. It was the night before she disappeared on, well, I guess the night before she disappeared, right? And the other part that I think is worth talking about, and I say this with kindness, compassion, and sympathy, and I'm certainly not a person to point fingers and say, well, you're not as, I don't know if the word is close, but you're not as, and I don't know if the word is connected either, but you're not as in touch with your sibling or your family member as perhaps is not appropriate, but is ideal, or is
So just another thing that I think is probably worth mentioning is you may notice in this image the faces of their children are blurred out, and you might say, why are you not doing that now? You know, why are you not protecting their privacy now? Well, for two reasons. The one is they are now 3 years older than they were. And the other reason is they have elected to appear on camera in interviews. So I always feel in true crime, if there's a family member who's pulled into circumstances that aren't of their own making, you know, like if a relative has committed a crime, or if a relative is suspected or whatever, like you have in the MORPHEW case right now, if they don't give interviews and they don't participate, then I think one must try and protect their privacy. But I feel like if you do participate, then you give up that right, and you can't have it both ways, right? So that's the reason for the change in this. In the beginning, when I covered the MORPHEW case, I tried not to ever show the MORPHEW daughters, but they subsequently appeared on television defending their father, which makes them now part of the story. So that is the position that I take. I hope that makes sense.
Is one would have hoped for, put it that way. And I say that because I'm not often in contact with my siblings. They don't live too far from me, but we live sort of pretty separate lives. And I think, and the point I'm going to make in a moment has to do with if you aren't in regular contact with other people, and you disappear, is anyone going to notice? And is that going to figure into the premeditation of the person that, I won't say that she's in the custody of, but she's certainly in the care of, in the sense that she had cancer to some extent, but in terms of her spouse being a dominating figure, she was certainly to some extent should have been under the care and protection of her spouse, right? I've got to say again, just to personalize this and to show that I'm not trying to blame anyone here. When I went on a holiday recently, and when I came back after I'd been back maybe a week or two, I had a conversation with my father, and he didn't even know I was away. So if I had to disappear, I don't know how soon people would know. There was a time when I was writing books where I didn't want to be disturbed, and if I disappeared then, I don't know if anyone would have known any better. So I'm certainly not one to cast stones. I do want to compare this case to the Patrick Frazee case, in the sense that Kelsey Bereth had also transplanted, I believe, from California, and was close to her mother, but they weren't.
Well, I'm not quite sure why I've got a picture from The Little Prince. I'm not quite sure what that's about, but the interesting thing with this case is, I think we will just go on to the next picture. I really don't know why
they weren't in contact every single day, and so I think they actually stayed.
So the thing that I think is interesting with that whole contention, where you say she wasn't really in touch with her sister, with her siblings, and you hear her sibling after she disappeared saying the same thing. We didn't really communicate very often. Now that is what makes her communication with her sister just before she died so important. What I'm saying is, the fact that they didn't communicate very much means that the fact that she does communicate with her sister makes that communication show that something serious is happening in her life that sort of overrides whatever's going on, the undercurrents, the grudges, the whatever dynamic was going on there. The fact that I think, as far as I can remember, I think she sent a text on the Friday night, and her sister actually deleted this really long text that Suzanne sent to her. And I think it had to do with concerns about her marriage. And it's really unfortunate that her sister did delete that text. I don't know if one can retrieve it, but that's the situation.
Staying in the crime scene, which had been cleaned up. And I think after about a day or so, her brother noticed a slight blood smear on the bottom base of the toilet. But the point is, if you compare it to, for example, Shanann Watts, where somebody missed her within hours, it feels like this period of time that is going by is a gargantuan amount of time. I'm talking about.
So I remember early on, I actually thought Suzanne may have died or been killed even on the Friday. I don't know if you guys remember that. Like it wasn't actually clear if she died on Mother's Day, like on her bicycle, or related to the bicycle, or was it the Saturday, or was it even the Friday? And then, because there was very little information to begin with, and then the information eventually came out that she was having an affair, and that she was texting Jeff Libler, and that was at 1 p.m., somewhere around 1 p.m. on the Saturday. And so what we know for a fact is that she was still alive on Saturday, sort of midday. But I don't know if you guys remember, very early on, some of us thought that she may even have been killed on the Friday, because she was sort of at home and not really, and I think she was seen in town on the Friday afternoon, but then after that no one really saw her again, right? So But the point is, if you are someone who doesn't really interact a lot with your family members, maybe you don't have the best relationships with family members, maybe you've left all your friends in one state and you now are living in another state, then if you do disappear, no one's really going to know when that happened. And that is a little bit pertinent in this case. If you pay attention to the clip that I played right in the beginning from the other reporter, all the reporters are repeating the same thing. That's just not true, that she disappeared on Mother's Day. It's just not true. She was last seen and heard at 1 or 2 o'clock on, so the last proof of life, where she actually sent a photo of herself suntanning at the pool, was about 1 p.m. on that Saturday. That's the last time she was seen, right? So if you say that she disappeared on Mother's Day, you're actually playing into the narrative of the last person who saw her, and that hasn't been proved yet. That definitely hasn't been proved yet. So I think the best thing to say is she was last seen on, or she was last heard of on that Saturday, the day before Mother's Day. And that is how, when you get one note wrong, you ruin the whole symphony. Because even the defense could make the case that, no, whatever happened to Suzanne, in other words, in their opening statements, the defense can say, whatever happened to Suzanne happened on Mother's Day. And you lock the jury into that scenario. And then you simply say, well, where was Barry that day? Well, he got up and he went to work, but her remains were found somewhere else. And that's how you can defend that case, quite simply. But it's an oversimplification.
About in the Kelsey Bereth case, the other thing that is probably worth mentioning is in the Casey Anthony case, her daughter was basically missing for a month and nobody really noticed. And what that is.
Stephanie says, how do we know that Barry Morphew didn't send the photos in text? How do we know that Barry didn't send a photo of a smiling Suzanne and texting whatever they were texting? I think there are two ways to know. The one is, at the time that the text was sent, where was Barry's phone? So that's one simple way. Another way is, Jeff Libler could be asked, was this the sort of way that she would interact, with the emoticons? I think all of us have a sort of a kind of vocabulary when we text. Emoticons and things that we generally use. And that actually came up in the Patrick Frazee case, where they said, is this the kind of way that she would text? And it literally had reference to things like emoticons and, and just her style of communicating. And so the person who received that text said it didn't really seem like her, because she would often ask about this, or, and be quite friendly. So, yeah, so that, I hope that addresses that.
It's telling you is that there's not the sort of cohesion that you would ideally have in a family, right? And because of that lack of cohesion, someone can take advantage of that in a criminal context.
So does anyone know who that person is on screen? Anyone know who this is? It's not Barry Morphew. Does anyone know who that is? So that is Jeff Puckett, and Jeff Puckett was in Broomfield with another person who was supposed to work with Barry, and he is someone who spoke about the hotel room, that I'm not sure who said what, but one of them said that there were a lot of wet towels on the floor, that the rooms smelled of chemicals, that there were papers in the bin, insurance papers and things like that. Anyway, this guy's no longer alive. This guy has passed away in the past year or two.
Right? So I'm certainly not criticizing Suzanne's sister, because as I say, not everybody.
So something else that I think is quite interesting to think about is what a lot of the narrative has been about is that Suzanne had an affair, right? What about Barry? Now, I actually read in a news article, I think it was Daily Mail, where they were saying they both had affairs. Do you guys remember? You guys remember seeing that? And do you believe that? Now, I'm not sure whether Barry admits having an affair. I don't know whether there's proof that he had an affair. What I do know is that it looks like Suzanne suspected him of having at least one affair. I think she even seems to suggest that he's had more than one, right? But what I think is quite interesting with this idea that they both had affairs is you kind of have this weird mirror. And again, I don't know for a fact that he did have affairs. We do know that he seemed to be having relationships pretty soon after Suzanne disappeared. But anyway, the bottom line is if you assume, yes, they did both have affairs, then you say, why were they then married? Like if they're both cheating on one another, and note the word if they are both cheating on one another, then why are they still married? And it's a reasonable question, but it's often a little bit more complicated than that. But I think the distinction is, and this is just my opinion, I think the distinction is she's having an affair and she doesn't want to be married anymore. She's realized whatever's going on, the fairy tale's over, and she wants to move on with her life. But if you take that same concept that she's having an affair and wants to leave, and he's having an affair, why doesn't he want to leave? If they're both having affairs and she wants to leave, why does the one want to leave and the other one doesn't? What do you think's going on there? Why does one who's having an affair want to leave the marriage, but the other one doesn't? Do you think it's about being possessive? And I showed you guys this book previously, Christine, where and I don't know if you can see at the bottom there, sometimes ownership becomes possession. Is that what's going on there? Is it just like a really possessive dude, right? Or is there some other thing that is driving the whole thing, that I can't afford to get divorced? So that's quite an interesting point. Jody says it's a romantic affair versus a fling. Terry Dean says financials. So, if you think about it, I'm having an affair, but I can't afford to get divorced. It's a little bit like you want your cake and eat it. So I want to, bear in mind, Suzanne is having an affair, but she doesn't want to stay in the marriage, right? If you're having an affair, but you still want to stay in the marriage, I think it's like you want your cake and eat it. If there's some other thing that is benefiting you, right? Songbird says, I think money. Pauline says, interesting question. Okay, anyway, let's just continue.
Has fantastic day-to-day conversations with other family members or whatever it is. Some people are just different. But the fact that she wasn't in contact with her sister regularly, and not only her other people as well. And I guess that also applies to perhaps her parents, because of course one of them had died. I'm not quite sure what the status is exactly and when these dates were. I'm still trying to catch up on that part of the family history. But the bottom line point I'm trying to make is, from Barry Morphew's point of view, is he had to be thinking, if Suzanne disappeared, would anyone notice? Right? Would and you might say, well, wouldn't his daughters notice? Well,
So if you take that point and you say, when did Suzanne probably die and when did anyone notice? It is quite an unusually long period if you compare it to Shanann Watts, for example, right? So, and I think that same idea is very interesting in the John Benet Ramsey case as well. But in any event, let's assume that the incident occurred, let's say 3 p.m. or 4 p.m. on the Saturday, right? Let me say that again. Let's assume, based on what we know, that the incident happened at, say, 3 p.m. or 4 p.m., somewhere around there, give or take 1 or 2 hours on Saturday afternoon. Then you say, when did anyone notice that she was gone? Well, the answer is not on Saturday. No one noticed anything on Saturday. Saturday goes by, and now the next day is Sunday. Sunday is not the best time for, how can I put it? That weekend wasn't the best time to commit a crime because the next day is Mother's Day. So if the idea was to get a head start on whatever you were doing, that wasn't the cleverest strategy. Let me just say that again. If you had a premeditated murder going on with Suzanne Morphew, then you could almost not have picked a worse time to do it, like the day before Mother's Day, because that's exactly what's going to happen. It's Mother's Day, and people are going to call, right? And so I do wonder whether the murderer forgot that it was Mother's Day the next day. I just wonder whether that's not what happened, that the killer just forgot that the next day was Mother's Day. I don't know what you guys think about that, but in any event, it was because of Mother's Day. If the next day wasn't Mother's Day, I don't know how long it would have taken to wonder where Suzanne was. But because it was Mother's Day and her daughters called and tried to get hold of her, probably from like the middle of the day onwards. So it was eventually only Sunday afternoon that they realized she wasn't there. And of course, Barry's got what appears to be a watertight alibi. Well, I'm in Broomfield. Oh, is she not there? I'm in Broomfield. I'll come down, right? The point is, we're dealing with a case here where it did take quite a long period of time, close to 24 hours, that the killer had a head start on everybody else. Certainly based on the evidence, based on what we know.
Well, yes, but they were in his care, and he was able to perhaps influence them. The other side of it is, would an employer notice her absence? And the answer is no, because she wasn't working for anyone. So who would notice her absence? And if she did disappear, how long would it take for her family members?
Yeah, and so that's also a good point. Is if you wanted to commit this crime, if you decided I'm going to commit this crime, and you wanted to commit the crime close or near to the home, or something like that, then you would be wary that there are these two daughters who could come into the room or return from wherever they were at any point. And so you would perhaps want to know when the coast is clear. And so I think if you were coming into this investigation as a brand new investigator, I think one question you'd probably want to do is, want to ask is, how many people knew that the Morphew girls were away from home that weekend? I think that would be, in a way, part of your narrowing down of suspects. And so if you've got a serial killer in this case, well, so of the people that knew that the Morphew girls were away that weekend, is one of those people a serial killer?
To sort of catch up to what was happening. And I think the answer is that it took a little while, right? But the point is that this isolation would be something that.
So Pauline Buckle says, I don't think it was premeditated. Why do you say that? Why do you say? And I think I've got an idea why you say that. So in a scenario where someone stumbles on somebody else, how can I put it? Somebody stumbles on someone else texting with, in a adulterous situation, then are you saying that then triggers something, right? So I suppose there is something to that. I suppose there is something to that.
It would be something that could be utilized by a perpetrator, and it was something that a perpetrator would probably notice. How often are you on social media? How often are you on your phone? How connected are you to other people? And this is where we come into the cancer conversation, where we talk about what role did the cancer have in isolating Suzanne.
So think about that. What role did the cancer have in isolating Suzanne, right? So she's, in a way, not even going to be at home. She's going to be in a hospital, and it's going to kind of interfere with her relationship with her daughters. Barry's at home with the girls, and Suzanne is not at home for days at a time, and she's now, already kind of somewhere else, right? In a weird way, again, you've got an analogy of sorts with the Chris Watts case, where Shanann believes that Nutgate was a potential threat to her daughter's life, and she says to Chris Watts's parents, "You will never see them again. You will never see your grandchildren ever again." And this then gives Chris Watts the incentive and the what's the word? The room, the space to then say, "Well, do you know why do you know why Bella and Cece and Shanann are gone?" Well, because remember she said you're never going to see them again. Well, she's made good on her own promise. And so that's just something that was born out of a sort of a health emergency. But the killer cynically uses that health issue to for his own benefit. And the question then is, did the same thing happen in this case? Did someone look at the fact that Suzanne was ill, was weak, was compromised in a certain way, and felt that he could take advantage of that? In other words, he could use her weakness that he was intimately aware of against her. And if you think about the scenario that she ran away, you might say she ran away, and the reason we've never heard from her again is, well, she got cancer and then died. Nothing happened. Nothing. There was no foul play. She wasn't happy, and then she left, and then, well, the reason we've never heard from her again is maybe she got cancer. That could be your cynical weaponizing of that narrative in a way that doesn't really implicate anybody, right? But the question is it true?
Now, it's kind of...
And I mean, you heard that person say she would never have left her own children. That is also what they said about Shanann. She would never have done that to her own children.
In two areas. The one area is that she'd already moved from Indiana to Colorado, and so that was already isolating her from her family and friends, and the fabric that she was once part of. But the cancer would then further isolate her, right? And then not only that, it was also the coronavirus. Colorado, the state of Colorado locked down on March 25th, right? So really at the end of March. So it was really something like 6 or 7 weeks later. It was a really short time into the lockdown that Suzanne disappeared. So that is the one side of the story. The other.
So whenever you've asked a question, what did his co-worker die from? What did Jeff Puckett die from? Remember, we had a look at his face earlier on. And I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking, was it suspicious? Well, here's the answer. he died in May this year, so actually around Mother's Day, and he died. There he is, and he died of actually of an overdose. He died suddenly at 52 years old. So it's March 16. There you have it, the toxicology report. He had a mild pulmonary edema. He had methamphetamine in the blood, right? Manner of death, accident. So that's the official version there. So I think it is quite important to be clear about this, because I'm sure the rumor mill will be, starting to move on this. So I don't believe that Jeff Bucket's death was anything but accidental. It certainly is unfortunate. According to the coroner's report, he died of an accidental overdose of meth. He was discovered lifeless in a room at the Sinaway Trail Lodge, a budget hotel, at 2:50 p.m. His brother also confirmed that. Okay. And so when he testified, he said, I thought the pool might have been open, but it wasn't, meaning they were wondering, where did the strong smell of chlorine come from? And so he actually said it definitely didn't come from the pool. He arrived at a motel paid for by Morphew on May 10 and described smelling a strong scent of chlorine in Barry's room. He said it appeared that Barry took a shower and there were towels all over the floor. The manager at the hotel said the pool was closed and they don't use chlorine to clean the rooms. So there was also Morgan Gentile there that said similar things. Okay, so there we have that sorted out.
Other side of the story is the cancer itself. What was the scale of it? What was the context of it? And I've tried to find out a little bit of information. There's a pretty good article, once again, in Fox 21, dated the 23rd of July. So 22nd of July, I guess, updated the next day, which includes a letter, I think, from, I'm not 100% sure of this. I'm not sure if it's from, I'm not sure if these are from Facebook posts, but a fellow cancer survivor.
So this is really quite important. These are cancer cost estimates. So you see over there, it says average monthly income pre-tax, $3,600. That's not really pertinent here. What is pertinent here is the average monthly cost of cancer treatments. Chemo can be up to $12,000, radiation $9,000, immunotherapy $10,000 to $12,500. Now, you might say maybe some of that was covered by this or that. The point is that it definitely, you can't say that it was helping their finances. Do you agree with that? You can't say that Suzanne getting cancer and then getting it again was helping their financial situation. The other thing that I personally found quite surprising was that this cancer port was found in her remains. I found that surprising, because my perception was that, even you heard Barry Morphew saying when he arrived on the scene, he said on the body cam, he said she rides every day. It's quite hard to believe that someone with a cancer port would be completely healthy and mountain biking every single day. It's quite hard to believe that. the other thing is you realize that would she have been completely over her cancer if she still had a cancer port? You would imagine that if she's been given a full or a clean bill of health, that she would that the port is now no longer necessary. You don't need it anymore. The fact that it was still there means she wasn't quite across that finish line. And I do think if there was a motive of I'd like this money, right? And what someone provided really interesting information that if Suzanne had died, could her partner have inherited money, right? It's a really interesting conversation. That there are two possibilities. The one is if she inherited $500,000, could her husband then have inherited that money if she died from sickness? And as far as I know, the answer is no. As far as I know, the law in Colorado states that inherited money cannot be further inherited by another person. I think the reason for that is to prevent, what's the word? To prevent son of Sam type scenarios, right? Whereas if she dies while they're still married, so in other words, if they divorce, oh, sorry, that's how it works. If they divorce, then the spouse, the divorcee, I guess, can't inherit the inherited, not inherit, can't be allocated the inherited money. That's actually how it works. Does that make sense? And so that's also one reason, possibly, that's one thing one can suggest here. Maybe that's why Barry didn't want to get divorced. His wife had inherited $500,000. And so if they divorce, he's definitely not going to get any of that money. And so, again, it raises the specter of how important were finances in the story. And if you look at where we are now, Barry Morphew has retained a very expensive criminal defense attorney, like one of the best in Colorado, if not America. Okay, could he have afforded his defense lawyer if Suzanne was still alive and there was some other crime that he was defending himself? Or is it essentially Suzanne's money that is paying for the defense of Suzanne's murder? It's just a question. I don't know what the answer is. I'd be interested to know.
Apparently said, it's just not clear from the article. I'm not sure if it's both of these messages are from Amy McCurry, a childhood friend, or it's just not 100% clear. But the gist that we get from that article is that she overcame Hodgkin's lymphoma twice. And the first occasion was before her children were born. And then the second was when the family moved to Colorado. And this really sent a couple of flags up in my mind. The fact that, because I had no idea that the timing or the context of the second cancer, right? I thought it was probably sometime when she lived in Indiana. And then once she'd gotten over it, then they moved to Colorado to sort of start their new life. It's not like that at all. It's not clear also whether the cancer sort of.
So what I found also interesting with the cancer aspect, it's not that hard to find photos of Patsy's cancer, and I also feel like Patsy's cancer is part of the reason what happened in the John Benet Ramsey case happened, because Patsy had cancer, she kind of had a more urgent sense of what she wanted to do with her life, and she did ultimately die of cancer, right? But the whole interest in pageants was, I think, Patsy's way of being happy, right? But the question is, well, how happy was John Benet, right? And what I remember, we'll come back to the Morphews, but what I remember when I was dealing with the Ramsey case was that apparently Patsy doted on Burke before her cancer, and was very close to Burke, and he was like the apple of her eye. And JonBenet was smaller; she was like 1 or 2, whatever years old, and after her cancer, it reversed. She bonded with JonBenet, and JonBenet kind of became a project. And then the question is, well, what happened to Burke? Well, Burke would never be Miss America, right? But so it's really interesting how cancer played a really important role in increasing the levels of tension. You can also bear in mind, if you Burke and Patsy is sort of doting on you, and then the next thing she gets cancer, she's not there as much anymore. Someone who is your cocoon is now just not there anymore. And then the other thing is, when she comes back, when she's beaten the cancer and she comes back, now it's like, oh, I'm so glad that you're back. Let's carry on where we left off. No, I'm actually going to turn JonBenet into, I'm going to focus on her now. It's quite a change. But I'm just saying, you can see how cancer plays a kind of a character role in its own way, raising levels of anxiety, raising levels of stress, turning the screws in on certain family dynamics, right? And another thing just to think about is, if someone is having an affair, just think about it like this. Often men cheat on their wives when their wives are pregnant, when their wives are otherwise preoccupied with whatever, and vice versa. Often wives cheat on husbands when they're busy at work. In other words, when one partner is preoccupied, the other one, when the cat's away and the cat's busy and focused on something, the mice will play, right? And so you can imagine in a scenario where Suzanne has cancer and she's got to worry about her health and she's got to go to a doctor, that is certainly going to create an opportunity. It's going to create spaces for the other partner to potentially have the freedom to see somebody else. I'm just saying it provides that space, right? Whether that did happen, I don't know for sure. I know that she suspected it. Whether there's any absolute evidence of that, as far as I know, there isn't. But it is suggested in her texts.
Started up once she was already in Colorado, or if it sort of started off as they were leaving. So that part is still not completely clear. But the fact is that it was coming back at the same time that they moved to Colorado. And so aside from the motive for moving to Colorado and all of that, and how that must have affected Suzanne, because you can imagine if she knew she had cancer, or even if she didn't know and she was feeling fatigued and struggling, perhaps even to some extent recognizing some of the symptoms, would you have wanted to do something like not just move home, but move to a different state? Sometimes when you're ill or fatigued, you
So that is quite a good point. I'm a little bit rusty on it, but the spy pen in the MORPHEW case was a little bit like Depp versus Heard. It was recording, secretly recording arguments and conversations, like, I can't remember exactly what was on those conversations. I think at one point she left the spy pen in Barry's truck. I don't know if that's by accident, but one of the ways, if you're suspicious, is you can leave something like that in someone's truck, and then you would know who's he calling. And remember, Chris Watts used the secret calculator app to hide his behavior, and he succeeded basically for all intents and purposes. Suzanne Morphew, I think, wanted to know whether he was having an affair and probably used the spy pen to remotely monitor, what he was saying, who he was calling his truck. And I think it was a little bit like Depp versus Heard. You can see the writings on the wall. You can see that the marriage is over. You're anticipating there's going to be some legal reckoning, and so you're trying to get your evidence right. And isn't that what Suzanne was doing?
You just instinctively don't want to do certain things. You want to hold back. You want to conserve. And of course, one of their daughters was going to study in Colorado, and I think Barry wanted a change.
I do think that that's a reasonable assumption. I don't know whether that is a fact, though. I don't know whether there's absolute evidence of that. I'm just a bit fuzzy on that. But it certainly is conceivable.
Probably wanted, things were stagnating, I guess, in Indiana on the work front, possibly. And so he wanted to get a new lease on life. Probably thought that there's probably a lot of landscaping work in Colorado because Colorado's growing, right? So this is the part that I think is important to bear in mind, that as they moved to Colorado, simultaneous, I guess, to that, she got cancer the second time. And then she celebrated her last cancer treatment. This is very important, on the 1st of October, 2019. So the cancer was, as you can imagine, the cancer was sort of present pretty much for the whole time Suzanne was in Colorado. So for Suzanne, I don't think Colorado was she may have been upbeat and positive, but I think the whole Colorado experience for Suzanne wasn't as awesome as it was for everybody else. She would probably associate Colorado with cancer, but of course also overcoming cancer. So they moved to Colorado.
So I think the other thing that shows that, thanks a lot, Deborah. I think the other thing that shows that her heart wasn't in Colorado, I mean, literally, was that she goes to Colorado and then she becomes ensconced in an affair with Jeff Libler. I'm just not quite sure if he was still living in Indiana. I'm not sure if we're going to get that information. I think he was based in Michigan. He lives in Michigan with his family. But the point is, Suzanne wasn't having an affair with someone in Colorado. Her heart was actually somewhere else. You kind of get the feeling she didn't want to be in Colorado, whereas you get the feeling Barry did want to be in Colorado. And you have a very interesting thing, again, similar with the Watts case, where both families leave their sort of small town roots and their families, and they move to Colorado, and then they both build and buy big houses, and they're sort of living large, but they can't actually afford it. And haunting all of this is both affairs and sickness. And what is going on in terms of the psychology is these are two scenarios where they are pursuing a fairy tale. They've come to Colorado for this larger than life, to really, to grab hold of this fairy tale and have this incredible life, only for it to turn into a nightmare. And it's more a nightmare for the one person than the other. And so as a result of that, murder takes place. It's just very interesting how the fabric is similar.
In the fall of 2018, and so more than a year later she was still receiving cancer treatments, and then had her last cancer treatment sort of at the end of fall on October the 1st, 2019. But it wasn't over, and that's where we go to this brilliant statement that gives you just this inside view into what was going on. What did it feel like being next to Suzanne while this was going on? And so she said, a fellow cancer survivor, she's not named, I just really would like to know who this is. She said, some days I would be in the chair next to her getting chemo. Suzanne was one of the nicest people I've met. She was cheerful and had a great attitude. She loved her daughters more than anything. And this is the part that I think is quite noteworthy. Her daughters, one or both, would always be with her for her treatments. I saw Barry come in once, and he was not overly friendly and seemed to be uncomfortable there. That is not unusual, as it's often hard for loved ones to be there. And then she talks about the last day of her treatment. So you can go and read that article. I just think it's interesting that her daughters are there for her and Barry sort of isn't. Barry comes in once, is not friendly, perhaps he's quite tense and seems to be uncomfortable. Now, why do you think that could be? And I think one area where you can definitely get a sense of the scale of the mountain.
Okay, now I understand why I had that little Prince picture, because it's the Cancer Mountain, and then you've got an elephant inside it, and so the elephant in that case was the cancer. It's like the elephant in the room was the cancer. You can imagine if you like a really selfish person, or even if you're not, your partner being really sick isn't gonna be a lot of fun. It's not going to be very sexy. It's not going to be it's not a fairy tale when your partner's got a serious illness, right? It doesn't fit in with this fairy tale thing that's kind of going on. I don't know what you guys think. This is a 30-minute video, the one that's paused now. This was the time when I didn't actually script videos. I would put the information together a little bit like I'm doing now. And I don't know about you, but I think the quality of videos has improved a lot since whenever this was made. Is it 2 years ago? 2 years ago. I think the quality's improved. I think the scripting makes it a lot tighter and sort of better done. I don't know what you guys think. Anyway, I think shall we go on to another video? It is Inside Suzanne's Emotional Battle. So, if you talk about the Cancer Mountain, you can talk about the money, you can talk about that aspect. And that is a very relevant aspect, the cancer aspect as a financial dilemma, right? But I think the other side of cancer is also the emotional drain that has on you. And it can lead to an existential crisis where you say, life is temporary, life isn't guaranteed, and I want to make my life count for something. I want to live my life while I've still got it. I don't want to waste years in a loveless marriage or in a job that I don't enjoy or whatever it is. And so that's the other aspect. So let's go into, I just wonder if there's anything else I want to touch on here. So let's go into Inside Suzanne's Emotional Battle with Cancer.
So all of this provides us with an intertextual glimpse into what Suzanne experienced. We're trying to fathom what she went through, what was going on in the dynamics. If you've had cancer, then you probably have quite a strong sense of it. If you haven't, you probably wouldn't know. I'm a little bit disappointed by the relative lack of interest in the video that I did on cancer, just because I think it's an important part of Suzanne's story. So if you haven't seen it, go and have a look at it. It does deal to some extent with the financial side of things, which may or not be relevant. But I certainly think the one thing that it definitely did trigger was anxiety, tension, emotion.
So what I think's interesting in hindsight from these videos I did on the cancer aspect is, if you didn't really pay attention to Suzanne as a person, you didn't like walk in her shoes, then if you were law enforcement and you'd found these human remains, right, would you have assumed them because bear in mind when law enforcement was searching for the other human remains of I think it was Edna Quintana, I think that's who they were looking for, and they stumbled across other human remains. If you didn't know anything about Suzanne's backstory, about her life, and you found these human remains and you found this cancer port, you would have just shrugged and you wouldn't have known what to think about it. But if you did know at least a little bit about her story, or if you found this piece of plastic between the bones and you found out that it was a cancer port, then you would have or should have immediately thought, could this be Suzanne Morphew? Do you know what I'm saying? And that is why in the TCRS toolbox, I say the most important tool, and it's a never-ending process when you investigate a case, is identity, finding out who someone was, finding out what their deal was, what their struggle was. And that applies to the victim as well as to the perpetrator. Who is this person? It's the most difficult, but also the most valuable work that you can do. Does that make sense? Investigators on scene, they didn't know the story and they were just confronted with a few bones and a little piece of plastic lying in the dirt. They could have just said, well, you know what, we found something, we don't really know what this is about. But they must have assumed, someone there must have assumed, could this be Suzanne Morphew? And I suppose it wasn't that far away from the Morphew home to begin with, 45 minutes drive.
It would just basically up the ante for whatever the dynamics were there already. And you're going to see that in these two narratives that I'm going to share with you. Two quick points I want to make is it's interesting that the crime sort of plays out near a place called Maysville, given the significance of the month of May. Suzanne disappeared in May. Barry's father died in May. It was Mother's Day in May. Just keep your ears open and your eyes open for things that happen in the month of May in the history surrounding these characters. There really is quite a lot. May was also the month that Suzanne put something on Facebook to say that they were listing their property for sale. So May was really the month that they also decided to leave their former life in Arcadia. And Arcadia is quite an interesting concept in itself. The word itself means utopia. And so the one utopia seemed to sort of be fading. And so they went to what they believed would be another utopia. And of course, instead of a fairy tale, Suzanne would eventually find herself in a nightmare of someone else's making. So let's start with the first narrative. This is from someone on Patreon that shared her story. It was really unsolicited. I'm not going to mention her name, but thank you very much for sharing it here. And this is a quote from this particular person. She writes, "I've gone through the process of divorcing after cancer and had a lot of counseling before and after. Everyone's experience is different, but I've been thinking about Suzanne and wondering if there were similarities. I had and still have chronic myeloid leukemia. When you're going through cancer or starting on chemo, every day is life and death. Trying to eat well, exercising gently, resting, remembering to take the medication, etc. There isn't time to think about whether or not your relationship is working. It's not the time to think about divorce or even further life aspirations. For me, it was only when my health returned and the chemo plan set my life back on a new normal that I could reflect with my counselor about how I felt. I felt that if I stayed with him, I would die alone. My family lived quite far away. I felt so terribly alone when I started feeling better because I hadn't felt supported. I didn't feel like he and I were in it together, and I felt like the grief of the cancer was all about him. When an argument came to a head and he delivered an ultimatum, do what I want or leave, I left. It was a shock to both of us because I never thought I would ever leave. When I think about Suzanne, the kids were able to fly by themselves. and were off to university, she was hopefully well enough to think about the type of life she wanted. She had just come into money. If she wasn't sinking the cash into their shared funds, I wonder if she was planning her exit, going along with the move to Colorado until she could execute her plan. But then Barry couldn't accept it and fixed the situation to suit him best, unfortunately resulting in her murder. The other thing I was thinking, after I started feeling better, I wanted to do things. I wanted to go to art galleries. I wanted to go to a jazz bar. I'd never been to one. I have an enthusiasm for life that was unequally yoked to my then husband. So it might not be all Barry wanting an exciting life, but the evolution in change of yoke between them. So thank you very much for sharing that story. I think the part that really stands out is after having overcome her cancer, when she was in that sort of recovery period, when her health was returning, that was when she started to reflect, and that was when she realized how she felt. When the strength was returning, the life was returning, she felt, this is the narrator that shared her story. She said, if I stayed with him, I would die alone. My family lived quite far away. And we know that to some extent, Suzanne was pining for Indiana. She was planning on a school reunion, a 30-year school reunion, and also involved in a wedding, right? So perhaps she realized to what extent she didn't feel supported. I think an important factor here that is perhaps different is the age and stage in their lives of Suzanne's daughters. I think she wanted to be there for them, and I think to some extent they wanted to be there for her. I do think it's kind of ironic that they weren't there on Mother's Day, and they were.
It definitely is quite ironic. I do want to share with you guys a text that Suzanne sent that is quite important. It's somewhere on this video. Somewhere on this video. I think we might need to go through. So while we're here, let's have a look at some of this evidence. That is what's known as a camelback. It's what you put on your back. You fill it with water and you put it on your back while you mountain biking. As far as I know, that looks there. You can see like a pipe, and these straps go over your shoulders, and then you use that while mountain biking. So the fact that there's no water bottle on that mountain bike, and the camelback is in the car, just shows that was definitely not Suzanne going out for a bike ride. I mean, I think that's obvious, but that's another reason for that. That's her purse. That's the contents of her purse. A couple of dollars, $10 notes over there. Not sure what that all is, but there's her ID. So, why would you leave home? This is the defense's crazy case. How many people would leave home and leave all of their personal things like their ID? This is if you're leaving home permanently, if you're running away from home, why would you leave things like your ID and your wallet behind? Who would do that? That's Suzanne in Indiana. She was a teacher in another life, and happy. She was very happy in Indiana. If you watch this footage carefully, the one daughter, as they come out of court, looks up into the sky and says something like "thank you," almost like she's thanking God for giving her, I guess, what she wants. And so yeah, you have this sort of pro Barry team, the daughters and the lawyer all on Barry's side, and then you sort of wonder, what about Suzanne? What about justice for Suzanne? And maybe the thinking is just that, well, their mother's never coming back. No matter who's responsible, their mother's never coming back. But they've still got their father. And this was obviously early days. You can see they're a lot younger here. This is early days in terms of their move to Colorado. And these were images that I would never show on my channel just because at that time they were basically minors, right? You can see that they were living quite a high life. It's funny enough, Chris Watts and his wife also went, you've also got kind of these tropical island vacations that they went on. And so this is quite interesting. The Morphew home was sold before a year had even gone by. Within 10 months, Suzanne Morphew's home was sold. And where do you think that money went? I think it sold for 1.6, 1.7 million. Where do you think that money, or what do you think that money was for? So I do want to deal with the timeline. I'm just still trying to look for that text. But anyway, here is a picture of the hole, and you can, I don't know if you can see there 3 layers of soft dirt, and then this is hard mud, and that's possibly why it was a shallow grave, because this is quite difficult to get through. And then there's a layer of dirt below that. And the soil is moist, even though it looks like a desert. The soil is quite moist, and the water table is just below that. Edna Quintana is the woman that they were looking for when they found Suzanne's remains, and she is actually still missing. Trying to find. I wonder whether I can find that text. Doesn't seem to be a. There's a very young Suzanne Morphew, presumably also taken in Indiana. This is a image from Alexandria, which is where the Morphews kind of grew up. It's a very small town setting. Reminds me a little bit of Aberdeen in South Carolina, where Shanann lived. A small sort of town. It's a very different fabric to Colorado. Everything's very, very different. So I do want to deal with the timeline. I'm not going to deal with that here in too much detail. We will cover that in following analysis as it's sort of part of the TCRS toolbox. I just want to see if, yeah, so I can't find that text. Not sure why it's not here. Actually quite far away. They were in Idaho, and I have gone to the effort to identify which camp they were at in Idaho. But of course, Idaho is also the home to the Lori Vallow case, and that story's got quite a strong cult/religious, overtone kind of thing. It's just ironic that on the way to this camp in Salida, and sorry for mispronouncing it earlier, it is about 13 hours away. And if you had to travel through to Rexburg, you would go through Yellowstone National Park. And, it's just interesting that how these 2 crimes are connected, certainly in terms of place to some extent. But it's just a little bit of a strange scenario here. The idea of Suzanne moving to Colorado
to sort of be close to her daughters, and her daughters not being very close to her geographically on Mother's Day, and this opening a window, possibly in her murderer's mind, to do what ultimately happened. So that is the one narrative. Let's go into a second one just to get a second look at this whole thing. She wrote, this is another narrator. She said on Patreon, she says, like I said, I was 37 when I was diagnosed with cancer. It started out as a rather slow growing cancer, so not a ton of immediate concern. Then they found out I was pregnant, and that changed everything. My doctor said the pregnancy turned a candle into a wildfire. So after several surgeries to try to get ahead of the cancer, it was decided that I had to have a rather radical surgery, which unfortunately meant losing the baby. My other children were ages 18 months and 7 years at the time. My then husband's reaction to it all was bizarre, I thought. There was never any comfort towards me, and it seemed to me and to everyone else that his concern was for himself. He acted like my cancer was an annoyance to him. I can understand that to a certain degree, as my death would have left him to raise 2 young girls alone, and it completely disrupted our lives. However, I basically had to deal with all of the emotions of 1, having cancer, 2, being pregnant, and 3, losing the baby quite alone. During my recuperation period following my final surgery, my ex literally went to bed for about 3 months with profound depression, again leaving me on my own to deal with not only my situation, but with his. At the time, he was in his mid-40s. Our marriage wasn't the most solid on a good day, and this really impacted the relationship. We grew apart quite rapidly. Thrown into all of this, my oldest daughter was diagnosed with cancer when she was 13, which was 6 years after my diagnosis. And it was an extremely rare form of cancer. In fact, she was the first person ever to be diagnosed with this particular form of cancer. We were sent out of state to a children's research hospital for a treatment for about a year, which separated my daughter and myself from my husband and my youngest daughter. Strangely, I found that I was much happier living apart from him, even with the horrors of dealing with my daughter's cancer and her extreme cancer treatment she received. Once she and I were able to return home, we continued to have to travel to this out-of-state hospital on a regular basis for continued treatments and follow-up appointments with her team of doctors. During those trips, my youngest daughter was able to come with us much of the time, which was wonderful. After about 5 years of that, I was in my early 40s and my husband had turned 50. Our marriage continued to deteriorate, and he seemed to blame our marital problems on my daughter's cancer and the fact that it separated our family because of the out-of-town hospital where she received her treatment. Counseling didn't help. He would never show up to the appointments, and I finally filed for divorce. Funny thing is, I was the one who ended up going through a midlife crisis. I was pretty off the rails for about 3 years. I had spent the previous 10 or more years in pretty hellish circumstances with my cancer, my daughter's cancer, the deteriorating relationship, etc. And I just said, F it, I'm out. I somehow justified my crisis and quite simply was tired of being the strong one who handled everything. I wanted to be irresponsible for once in my life. However, I found that the type of lifestyle didn't suit me and wasn't who I was as a person. For the past about 15 years, I've been back to myself and I'm very content with my life. I was never a career woman. I instead focused on being a mother to my girls and taking care of my aging parents. My working career was always as a secretary or a legal assistant, so I never made a lot of money and mostly worked part-time. Now I am retired as of this past Tuesday, and I'm trying to imagine my life as a non-working person at the age of 63. I've always been a homebody, and I suppose I will continue to be. My loves are my children, my significant other, my dad, my home, my pets, a dog and 3 cats, and my garden. I've also taken up watercolor painting, and I'm thoroughly enjoying that. So to wrap this up, I've found that cancer or any type of catastrophic disease or circumstance will either draw a couple closer together or it will tear them apart. It definitely tore us apart. With regard to the MORPHEW case, I have a feeling it tore Barry and Suzanne apart. Perhaps Barry, like my ex-husband, only saw his wife's cancer in terms of how it affected his own life. and not how it affected their lives together or her life as an individual or woman or mother or wife. Ironically enough, my father also had cancer prior to mine and my daughter's, and it drew him and my mom closer. It is so true that men and women face these things completely differently. Women are natural nurturers, and men are natural hunter-gatherers. I don't think most men can reach down and pull out the feminine side of themselves when a woman needs them to do that. Some men can, obviously, but I don't think that is the norm. I think that is just an excellent personal narrative shared by someone on Patreon. And I think what she highlights there really emphasizes the disconnect, but in a very sort of subtle way that's in a way not subtle. And that is, can this very masculine man, this baseball hero, this baseball star, can he access the feminine side to him, the sensitive side, the nurturing side, when that is needed? And that is the question here.
Okay, so I have found the text that I've been looking for. I had to go to my other computer to find it. We're only halfway through this particular episode. If you want to watch the rest, you can see no one really watched it, just 5,000 views. But if you let's do it like that. If you want to watch this on your own time, I'm putting that one in chat. And let's see if I can find the other one. This is the other one, Suzanne's Cancer Mountain. We've also just gone to about halfway through this video. So let's, I'll put that in chat as well. But what I want to show you guys now is this text. This one here. So I'm not sure who it's with. I guess it could be Sheila Oliver. I'm not 100% sure, but whoever it is, says, praying for your strength. Have you looked into the next steps if you move toward getting out? And I think she's referring to getting out of the marriage. If you decide to get out the marriage, if you decide to leave, then she says, not really. I feel unequipped. Now you can imagine if you've just been battling cancer, you lack the resources, emotional, in terms of your network, in terms of friends, but most of all, the wherewithal. You've now got to deal with the emotional battle of, and the otherwise battle of being in a divorce. You've just come through the minefield, the war of attrition that is cancer. Now you've got to jump into another one. You can imagine you wouldn't want to do that. You wouldn't want to rush that process. She says, I feel unequipped. I wish I could just have an amicable talk. And then she says, but dealing with a narcissist. That's the one image I wanted to share. The other image is for those of you who feel confident. Sorry, I wasn't supposed to do that. How do I get rid of this? For those of you who want to accuse Barry, want to say unambiguously Barry did it, this is a list of people that Barry's suing for $15 million for damage to his reputation. FBI agent Jonathan Grussing, CBI investigators Schaefer, Kirby Lewis, Kevin Kobach, Derek Graham, Caitlin Rogers, Megan Douge, Joseph Cale, John Camper, William Plackner, and so on and so on and so on, right? So just be aware that this lawsuit is targeting literally all or most of the investigators who are investigating him. That's just why I say be careful with your whatever you say. Just be careful. Sorry to hear that. I've got to say, and it's sad to say this, a lot of my supporters are also struggling with cancer and illness. And I think you can see how a case like this has that dimension as well. It has this dimension. It's not as simple as just a woman who disappears on Mother's Day. There are other dynamics playing out in the background. I just find it very interesting that it was so hard to find photos of her with this cancer porter. Just find that very interesting. It is a good point. How is it going to impact the case? Well, it's one way for the lawsuit to be overturned if it's proved that the allegations are true. That's one way. Another way is if they find out that somebody else committed this crime, a serial killer, then and have you make sure you vote in that thing, then he will win the lawsuit. So in other words, if they can prove in court that somebody else committed the crime, then that proves reputational damage. So in a way, we've got two court cases, legal battles that sort of involve Barry Morphew. Well, we assume that there might be a second one. We'll see. It's certainly involving the Morphew family. Well, I think what happens is they will then decide whether they can prove it. They'll probably pause the lawsuit pending the outcome of this case. I don't think they will first, because I think the lawsuit is built on the allegations of the investigation. So I think they would say, legally, let us first complete our investigation. We've got some new evidence. We've got some new information. Does that further implicate Barry, or does it not? Right? That's really going to be the next thing. Okay, so there's one more thing that I want to share with you guys, and that is the mismatch of, I've shown you guys this particular thing. It's not that. I've shown you guys this slide. It's actually a defense exhibit. You can see that Barry was in the Creastone area, which is just around the corner from Moffat. It's less than 4 miles away, right? And this is the whopper that we're getting from the defense at the moment. Think about the mismatch. On the day that Suzanne supposedly disappeared, Barry drives north to Broomfield, right? From around about here, he drives north to Broomfield. And because that's what he does as a landscaper, that's his job. It's not unusual for him to do this sort of thing. He drives to various locations, different properties, some near, some far, some often out of town. And what does he do at these properties? He toils with dirt. He toils with soil. He excavates. He's got equipment for that purpose. He's got a bobcat as well. He excavates. He moves the earth. He empties holes. He reshapes the lie of the land, and he fills them up again. And so on the day that Suzanne disappears, he drives almost 3 hours, 157 miles. Well, guess what? That is 3 times further than just going south to Moffat. Moffat is about 50 miles south and about 45 minutes drive. So what I'm suggesting, Okay, Timmy, I'm going to put you down. So are you guys able to make that out? So what I'm trying to show as this real mismatch in terms of making an argument is you say, yes, someone who for work purposes can easily drive 3 hours over 150 miles to do work. Well, why wouldn't they go 50 miles south to Moffat? And we already know that he did go to Creastone. This is based on the defense exhibit. And I think that is something that the defense assumes that people don't know or aren't aware of. And so making this statement that Barry'd never been south, it's just not accurate based on this slide, right? Okay, and so that sort of concludes what we're talking about here. Do you guys want me to briefly go through the timeline? I kind of want to wrap up at this point. That we over the 2-hour mark. I don't really want to be longer than 2 hours, but you guys want me to briefly deal with the timeline? In any event, the number one clue that we all missed was the cancer aspect, but specifically that cancer port. You might say, I didn't miss it. I heard the reporter mention it, but none of us thought about the cancer port, maybe because none of us knew about it, except for that image where you see that she's got like a plaster, some kind of covering for the cancer port. And so I don't know if you guys agree with me. None of us until now, until the reporter mentioned it, until it became part of what they found in her remains, none of us thought about the cancer port. And who would have thought that would be such an important piece of evidence in the scheme of things? So, someone says timelines. Okay. Yeah, it is interesting. Okay, and so let's deal with the timelines just really, really quickly. So we've got really 3 sources to look at. There is this one from the Denver Gazette, compiled by Carol McKinley, right? And we're not going to actually deal with this timeline, but just to show you how she sort of touched on it, quite a good place to start there. Who was Suzanne Morphew? So if you start the timeline, where do you start? Do you start on May 10th? Do you start it on Mother's Day? Do you start it the day before? Do you start it the day before that? How far do you go back in time? So she starts it in 1994. Essentially starts the timeline when Barry and Suzanne got married, and I think that is quite a good place to start. Is this story essentially about a marriage that has its life, the marriage that has its up and downs, the marriage that, how can I put it, the marriage that that has its own narrative, a beginning, a middle, and an ending, and isn't that perhaps one of the most important stories in this case in order to understand this case? And that's obviously if you believe Barry committed this crime. If it's not, then you probably want to look at the timeline of other things, I guess, like the timeline of the other. If it's a serial killer thing, then you want to look at that timeline, right? There you have it. Morphew's moved to Colorado. I'm not going to go through this in any detail. Things start happening in September 2018. Suzanne's best friend, they have a visit. Oliver is important to the case because she shared intimate details of a failing marriage over text to her, and a lot of that starts then. Thanksgiving, February 2019. The affair with Jeff Libler starts around about that time. she sends a text here saying, I sort of wish he would just get fed up with me and leave. I told him I'm done. I need peace. Valentine's Day 2019, what happens? Anyway, so I'm not going to go through this in too much detail. We can come back to this. Let's just go to, because we don't often talk about it, Friday, May 8th. Suzanne saved on her cell phone notes, applications, a list of grievances. So you can see things were really escalating on that week towards and building up to that weekend where she died. She even made a whole list of grievances. I think there was something like 50. And she said, act like I'm intruding in the garage, which an investigator who interviewed Barry later testified meant that he thought she had cameras in the garage. 9:28 a.m., she texted her sister Melinda. Remember, we sort of dealt with this thing that she didn't have very close relationships with her siblings. But the fact is that possibly the day before she died, she texted her sibling that hardly ever heard from her. And she said that she was dealing with a harsh abrasiveness. That was what she was dealing with. And I don't know whether Melinda didn't respond, didn't even respond to that text, but she says she didn't know what to say. Then at 10 a.m., Suzanne and Barry have a series of phone calls. So here you have her saying these things that don't sound terribly happy. Meanwhile, Barry's saying, I love you. That's kind of being recorded on the phone data timeline. And then the next thing is Saturday, May 9. Look at this, 59 text messages sent on that one day. That's also really important. 59 text messages sent between Suzanne and Libler on one day, and the next day silence forever on her phone. I think there was some Facebook activity where, do you guys remember that, where Barry actually said that Suzanne added certain male people as friends afterwards, which suggests that she's still alive and she's active on Facebook. I don't know if you guys remember that narrative. And her saying to Libler, we need to be husband and wife, that's on Saturday. You can imagine Barry seeing those words, how he would react. And then the question is, did he? 11:30 a.m. So that happens in the morning. At 11:30, Barry comes home for lunch and changes the blade to his Bobcat. That's also quite interesting. Is on that day of all days, he changes the blade to his Bobcat. 2:07 p.m. I think that is the last sign of life. Happened at 2:07 p.m. on Saturday. She sends a selfie to Libler, right? Quite a good timeline compiled by McKinley. And then Barry returns home and shows he was moving around outside the house. And his explanation was that he was shooting chipmunks. Okay, so we're going to end the timeline there. Here's another timeline from CBS Colorado. This one deals with, let's just do this. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but this one starts May 6th, 2020. So can you see which timeline do you think is more useful? This one from Denver Gazette that starts in 1994, although it doesn't really deal too much with the marriage. That is what I think does need to be dealt with. What was going on in the marriage? When did they meet? How did they meet? What led to their meeting? What was the fabric that brought them together? So I would be more inclined to want to go much deeper into the beginning of the marriage timeline in order to compare it to the end. And she asked a very important question. Who was she, right? and the answer you're going to get through going deeply enough in the timeline. Anyway, so here's another timeline from that just starts May 6th. We not going to worry too much about the marriage narrative. We're not going to dig too deeply into that. Well, then you're going to get a very superficial view of the circumstances. And so this timeline just deals with May 6th, May 9th. Again, that is quite important. 59 communications on that one day. And then the next day, her phone's quiet. And this is, I think, not accurate. It's not accurate to say that's the last day she was seen alive. I don't think that's accurate. And then that's the rest of the timeline, June, September. So basically, the timeline starts just before she disappears. Is that enough? Is that enough backstory? Is that enough context? I would say no. So if I was in charge or I was consulting on this investigation, I would say, we've got the finish line now. We've found her remains. We've found the evidence at that scene. Now we need to gather all of the information we've got, all of the case files, but we also need to start looking at this case in a completely new way. Let's start at the beginning. And then you say, what's the beginning? Well, you might say, well, when they got married. And I think you could have another investigator's job is look into the serial killer case, either to see if it's true or as a way to potentially disprove it. You need to understand what happened in terms of that idea in order to say it's not true, right? That's going to be the defense case, or it might be the defense case. In any event, you can have a separate investigator go and investigate that. Keep an open mind, be curious, see what you can come up with. Maintain the scout mindset. But in terms of the scout mindset, you also want to look at what brought these two people together and how can that be something, how can that fairy tale unravel? You know, what did Suzanne see in Barry and how did he see himself and how did that change over time? And so maybe you need to go all the way back to high school. Maybe you need to look at their parents and what was instilled in them. Maybe you need to look at the cultural fabric of Indiana and, in terms of that aspect. So here's another timeline, and let's go to the top. And I think what's nice about this timeline, and I'm going to end with this, what's nice with this timeline is it highlights some of the milestones. So this is kind of a good framework to say, so these are some of the basic things we know. Now let's go deeper, right? So the base, and this is looking at the timeline basically just through the prism of evidence. And so according to, I'll put a link to that in chat. So these are the basic, what's the word? Highlights. The charges were dismissed. They had a 25-year marriage, which is quite long, but had the marriage reached the end of the road? Suzanne also had daughters. To what extent? And I mean, this is actually a big unknown in this case. What do the daughters really know about what is going on? What do the daughters know about their father? What do their daughters know about their mother? Had their mother said, well, I'm actually done with you guys as well. I'm going to Ecuador. Had their mother confided anything? And it seems like their mother didn't really say things to her daughters that were private between her and Barry, to her credit. The fact that she went missing on Mother's Day, why were her daughters not there on Mother's Day? The other thing in terms of this is if the daughters had been told about, let's say both parents had affairs, right? I'm saying if both parents had affairs and the one parent tells the daughters that the other parent has had an affair, isn't it going to get the loyalty to pivot to the other parent, especially if the other parent still maintains that integrity of not airing the dirty laundry to the daughters, right? Investigators wonder, is this a stage? See, now this idea that the bicycle is a stage scene is already telling you someone needs to hide something, because if you didn't stage it, it would be obvious what had happened. Why would a serial killer stage the scene? Now, I would love to know, in all of these other cases, are they also staged bicycles? Is there also all of that effort to stage the crime scene? I mean, what serial killers will do often is they simply commit the crime and leave very little evidence. There's not much staging that goes on. If you look at this mountain bike, there's not only no water bottle, but there's no place for a water bottle. And so I would be very interested to know whether human remains, did they find anything like a camelback, because that's also plastic, and I think they wouldn't have. But nobody would go for a mountain bike ride in that time of the year, May, in that sort of terrain, without taking water with you. I mean, even in winter, you would take water with you. So that also suggests that it's staged. I don't think there's any doubt about that. There's an extensive search effort. What kind of perpetrator could be good at hiding remains in the wilderness, right? Bear in mind, this is a wilderness setting, just like Gilgo Beach. What kind of perpetrator would be good at hiding remains in a wilderness setting, not inside a home like the Ramsey home? It's not inside some kind of in a room or something, in a wilderness setting, in the outdoors. What kind of person would be able to do that better than somebody else? Spy pen leads to shocking discovery. What's the shocking discovery? The spy pen was in a walk-in closet in the Morphew's master bedroom. It's voice activated, records conversations. She was hoping to catch Barry in an affair. Instead, she inadvertently recorded conversations she had with her secret lover. So in a way, it kind of backfired. The spy pen actually recorded the fact that she was having an affair. Took a really long time to identify this person, and then he did cooperate. Love affair provides clues. Proof of life photo. Her last proof of life is on May 9th, a Saturday, not May 10th. There she says, I could care less what you're up to and have been for years. What do you think that is suggesting? I could care less what you're up to. I suppose it could have to do with money. I could care less with what you've been doing with money. Do you think she'd say that about money? I don't know. Then where did this crime happen? Did it happen by the bicycle? Did it happen in Moffat, or did it happen in the home? Well, there's a big crack in the bedroom door. There's also a bullet casing next to the bed in the bedroom. Cell phone records lead to a chipmunk alibi. I was running around trying to shoot chipmunks on Saturday afternoon. Digital vehicle forensics also reveal suspicious activity. These are basically the basic milestones of the story. This is the stuff you would want to say as the prosecutor in your heads of argument? Is that going to be a pivotal piece of evidence, a tranquilizer dart cap? Texts reveal a struggling marriage. Why do we have Suzanne's texts and not Barry's texts? What happened to Barry's texts? These are sent March 25th. He asked me if I'm talking to anyone about our marriage, like to friends. He came home when the girls are gone. He won't speak of divorce. He's begging for another chance. He's an avid hunter and outdoorsman. What does that have to do with the story? So what is a hunter? I've got a gun and I hunt. I didn't kill anyone. Well, it's not about you. It's the same argument we heard in Rex Human. It's the question of whether that's relevant to this story. Multiple trash runs. I think the passage of time has given us a lot more insight on this, because this was definitely confounding and confusing. Like, why on earth is he doing all of these trash runs on such an important day? Doesn't he know people are going to be noticing this? And now, what do you think the reason was for that, or what do you think the reason could have been? Because his truck is still pretty. He said it was to clean out his truck. Photos of his truck seems to show they were still pretty dirty. Have I got any? His truck's not the cleanest environment. I'm trying to get there's also a rear view of his truck where it's kind of, I think you've all seen it. Okay, and then what else is there? He's also got scratch marks. And the question is, what are those from? Are they fingernails? Are they from pieces of wire or something? What caused those scratch marks? Did Suzanne Morphew defend herself? Also, this has been law enforcement's suspect. Is he the right person, or is it Dashboard Dan, the guy who appeared on the DNA, the person who appeared in the DNA? Also, very kind of reinforcing to the defense case is the fact that Barry's daughters support him. Do they know something we don't know? Do they believe in their father because he is actually a good guy and because he is innocent? And then where we are now, is that going to change? Could there be one daughter that decides to reveal something, or is that not going to change? And then there is this twist, mystery DNA. And this is the wrong vehicle. Oh, no, hang on, it is the right vehicle. This is Suzanne's vehicle, and on this dashboard, they found DNA. Is that still relevant given where Suzanne's remains were found? Why, if it is relevant, why has Barry's lawyer not really brought this back up? Why is it now a serial killer? Male DNA in the Range Rover belonging to Suzanne. Okay, yeah, the Range Rover is belonging to Suzanne Morphew. So there you have it. And then the latest developments are pre-trial motions. Barry intending to file a civil lawsuit while he made good on his promises. And that's kind of where we got to. There were pre-trial motions, and it ultimately led to the charges being dismissed. Are they going to be brought back? Right? Are they going to be brought back? Okay, so that's it from my side. I'm going to sort of end off with a couple of pictures of Suzanne Morphew, and then we'll leave it at that. I just want to say thank you very much to who I'm not going to mention his name, the guy who went out to the site, recorded that awesome footage, even dug a hole, even got his hands dirty in that area. Thanks very much for going to the effort for that. I've actually asked him to return there to do some other things. There was someone else who volunteered to go out there, and thanks to your efforts, someone else didn't need to do what would have been a 6-hour drive, from Denver there and back. So thanks very much. You've really made life easier for us. If you guys in chat have got any things you'd like our sort of roving TCRS investigator to look at, let me know and I'll pass it on. Thanks a lot, guys. I just want to thank my mods, Stephanie, Terry, Chelsea. Chelsea, I hope you're feeling better. Thanks a lot, guys. Also to all the members who are here. Thanks, guys. I'm sure you'll agree that this was quite an interesting live stream in terms of information that we've either forgotten or didn't know of at all, or also, I mean, like I say, that image that I was looking for, I couldn't believe how hard it was to find. And when I get off this live stream, I'm going to go and see if I can find Suzanne's Twitter and see if I can find them again. And then, yeah, also thanks very much for the super chats. I really appreciate it. A lot of the super chats that you're giving, I'll actually be spending in America. So it's kind of going to a good cause. I would really like to go back to Colorado. My plan at this moment is to be in the Long Island area, and then California. That is more to do with it's close to Halloween, and some friends of mine are there. But then I plan to kind of get back to the Caitlin Armstrong case. The trial is playing out in Texas. I'd like to just go and have a look at that, and then I could go from Texas to get from Texas back home to South Africa. I might go by way of Colorado. In fact, I'm planning to. It's just it is pretty expensive investigation to go all the way from South Africa almost to the other side of the world. It is a little bit expensive. Obviously, I can spend a little bit more time in America if I'm staying with friends, and that is what I'm going to be doing. So I'm not going to be like staying 5-star hotels and that kind of thing. And I'm not going to. It's not like a work thing. I'm going because I'm curious. I'm going because I'm genuinely interested. I'm going because I sort of care about the Mo Wilson case. I'm really interested in what's going to happen there. And there is a very powerful defense lawyer, like there is in the Barry Morphew case, in that case, and I'm just concerned that about justice in that particular case. And I'm interested to see Austin, which is a bike-friendly city. And so it's kind of, I'm just following my curiosity. I mean, I'm genuinely interested in the subject. And I really loved America when I was there first time around. So at this point, it looks like I'm going to be seeing both Stephanies and then some friends of mine in California. And we'll see if I can make time for some more of you. I'll try and do a couple of lives while I'm on the road, but it definitely is quite tough. Thanks, guys. So I will try and review in the same way that I reviewed the Morphew case. I'll try and review the Caitlin Armstrong case just before I head over there. I'll do something similar. Well, thanks very much, Run the World. I really appreciate it. Really appreciate it. Austin is nice. I think you'll like it. I hope so. I think I'm going to take a swim in that pool as well. Okay, guys, I'm going to play out with this final footage of SUZANNE MORPHEW, and we are going to deal with time in more detail, but going way back. So it'll be a really deep dive. Thanks, everybody. Take care, and I'll see you guys next time. By the way, I did go to Alexandria when I was in Indiana, and I might show you guys some of that footage in the next live stream.